I knew I was being erased the moment I saw the third chair angled away from the table like a polite exile. My name is Mason Kerr. I'm 48, and for 15 years I ran the Great Lakes sales division of North Star Quill, a mid-sized publishing house based in Indianapolis that liked to pretend it was bi-coastal whenever the quarterly numbers looked pretty. I built that division from a folding desk, a road atlas with coffee rings for counties, and a Chevy with a heater that wheezed like an asthmatic trombone in January. I can still rattle off the names of buyers in Sandusky and store managers in Peoria the way some people recite sports stats. Numbers mattered, sure, but relationships were the currency that never devalued. The conference room used to smell like paper and binding glue, a good honest smell. Now it smells like citrus cleaner and ambition. The mahogany table had been replaced by a sheet of glass that reflected the ceiling lights and made everyone look pale. On the wall, a screen idled with a screensaver of diagonal lines, as if someone had wanted motion but not life. "Mason," said the woman at the head of the table, folding her manicured hands on a leather pad. "Thank you for joining us." Her name was Celeste Rain. She'd been CEO for 6 months and had entered the industry through a slide deck. Former tech strategist, Stanford, 3 startups, 3 exits, and a TED Talk about culture change that had gone mildly viral. Publishing, to her, was an outdated platform with an interesting brand story. She believed, and made the board believe, that she could digitally transform a company whose soul was still a literal stack of pages. To her right sat a younger man wearing the expression most people get when they prepare to say, unfortunately. To her left, someone from human capital, no longer human resources, because language is the cheapest renovation. "We appreciate your years of service," Celeste said, and the word years felt like dust settling in the carpet. "We're moving decisively toward a digital-first, data-led model. Your leadership style is rooted in legacy field operations. That isn't compatible with our direction." I glanced at the third chair again, the one angled toward the wall, put there for a person who needed to be present but didn't belong. I didn't sit in it. I kept my seat directly across from her, where I'd sat for a decade to present numbers she could have pasted onto any victory slide. "Your package includes 6 months severance, 90 days of benefits, and the standard agreements," the human capital representative said. "There's also a 12-month non-compete to protect client relationships." "I see," I said. "This isn't personal," Celeste added. "People say that when they want to keep their conscience dry." "Of course," I said, "because sometimes victory is leaving with your voice unshaken." I shook hands and walked out carrying a cardboard box that looked a little too new for the purpose to which it had been put. Inside were the artifacts that survive revolutions. A photo of my daughter in her butler sweatshirt, a brass letter opener someone had given me after the best quarter of my life, a notebook with a broken spine, swollen with names and smudges and promises kept. I left the awards in the drawer. They could keep the plaques. The work was already in the world. On my way through the bullpen, a few heads lifted then ducked in the same motion, fear and politeness colliding midair. I gave them a small wave that said it was all right. It wasn't, but gestures don't have to be true to be kind. In the parking lot, a sky the color of unprinted paper pressed low over the city. I set the box on the passenger seat and sat with my hands on the wheel. My phone buzzed. 3 missed calls from Anthony Calder at Rook and Bramble Press. A text from Marisol Vega at Copper Run Books. "Is it true? Call me." A voicemail from my assistant director, Sam Neely. They reassigned Ironfield to digital engagement. "Harrison's furious." I called Anthony first. "What did they do?" he said. "No hello. Friends skipped the preludes." "Transformation," I said. "I'm a legacy process." I sat through a 40-minute monologue yesterday from a kid who used the phrase funnel conversion 6 times and couldn't remember my lead author's name. "You think I'm going to hand him my backlist?" "They'll adjust," I said, out of long habit. "No, they won't, because they don't think they need to." His voice softened. "You built our list. You kept us alive through 2 winters and a recession. Don't undersell the part where you mattered." We hung up, and I sat far too still. I am not given to fury. Fury costs more energy than I can spare and breaks too much furniture on the way out. Still, something cold settled behind my ribs. Not anger. Clarity. I started at North Star Quill when it was still called Silver Grain Partners and ran on the smell of toner. The founder, Graham Lawrence, hired me in a hallway, passing me a coffee and a territory map as if he were handing over a family heirloom. "We don't need charisma," he said. "We need a stubborn person who will drive 400 miles in the snow for a meeting the client might cancel." I told him I was very stubborn. We built a division the way you build a barn, beam by beam, with neighbors helping not because of a contract, but because they'd be living next door when the wind came. I showed up at school libraries before sunrise to staple a banner straight and stayed after to carry boxes out to cars. I sent handwritten notes to a buyer in Marquette when her husband was sick and returned a deposit check to a bookstore in Springfield after a hailstorm took out their windows. We doubled revenue in 3 years by acting as if every order kept the lights on, because many of them did. Then Graham retired to a lake house with the stained wooden deck of a man who'd earned it. The board wanted scale. They wanted dashboards. They wanted terms like omnichannel and disruption to make their mouths feel modern. They courted Celeste and applauded her slides. She arrived with consultants in crisp suits and said publishing had forgotten it was a technology business with legacy artifacts. She meant books. I kept my team moving, even when they started adding digital engagement associates to my headcount without asking. Even when they took our 3 largest accounts and put them into a central portfolio with interns whose teeth were too white to blame. I kept driving because roads still led to doors and doors still opened to people. The summons had come on a Monday. I walked out on a Monday. Mondays are handy for turning points. They build their own calendar. When I got home, the house made the kind of quiet that feels like a held breath. My daughter, Evie, was spending a semester abroad, and the absence of her music left the living room sounding like a hotel lobby. I set the box on the kitchen table and opened the notebook. Inside were years of shorthand that would look like a conspiracy board to anyone else. SS Marquette / June table by window. MF hates phone pitches. Liddy, Cerny after surgery / send flowers. The excruciating, unscalable particulars of people, those were my sales strategy. You can't automate care. I made a list. It felt like the first breath after being underwater. Call attorney about non-compete. Do not call clients, even if they call you. Run along the canal in the morning. Body cannot turn to paste. Find the coffee that tastes like a porch in July. I slept for the first time in 48 hours. 2 days later, I found myself in a corner booth at Daylight Cafe with my attorney, Rachel Quinn. She reads contracts the way a woodworker examines a plank, running her fingers across the grain until the splinters show. "They try to make it pretty," she said, flipping the final page of my agreement. "It isn't. Too broad, too long, and trying to bind what they don't own, your brain." "They'll sue anyway," I said. "Probably. They have to look brave for their shareholders. But a lot of these clauses are unenforceable in this state. The key is what you do and how you do it." She tapped the paper. "No solicitation. No misuse of confidential information. You can't take their CRM with you. Can't represent yourself as them. But your relationships? Your general know-how? Those aren't theirs." "What if," I said, "I don't chase anyone? What if I just open a door and see who walks in?" "Then you're a room, not a magnet," she said, smiling. "Rooms are harder to sue." I registered a name that felt like timber instead of glass. Blue Harbor Collective. Not a company that boasted. A place you could bring your ship when the weather turned. I didn't start with a website. I started with a desk over a bakery that woke the building at 5 in the morning with the smell of cinnamon and heat. I bought 2 secondhand bookshelves that leaned a little and a used copier that liked to jam on even numbers. I assembled a corkboard and tacked up a map of the Midwest, the same way I had years ago, and drew careful circles around stores, districts, and tiny towns where a handshake meant you might run into each other at the farmer's market. I didn't call anyone. They called me. Anthony phoned first with a voice that sounded like he'd been waiting by the receiver all day. "I need a sanity check," he said. "They want us to abandon our library program. You know, the one you built with us, because the lifetime value is lower than retailers. We've been a publishing house for 80 years. Our best readers found us on a library shelf." "I can't consult," I said, reminding both of us of the paper between us. Anthony was quiet for a beat. "What can you do?" "I can host a conversation," I said slowly. "A council for independents who want to share intelligence and logistics without selling their souls. No exclusivity. No contracts. A potluck where everyone brings something and nobody pretends the casserole made itself." He laughed, the first laugh either of us had found in days. How many chairs do you have? 4, I said. I know 6 people who'll bring their own. By the end of that week, 8 publishers gathered in my warm, crooked office with bakery steam coming through the floorboards. They were a half-circle of battered courier bags and phones face down on the table. We talked about terms, about returns, about a chain store buyer who'd ghosted a purchase order and a digital rep who couldn't explain why her dashboard didn't line up with the accounting department's. We ate pastries and told the truth. When we broke, I noticed people exchanging numbers like kids after a field trip. I drafted a document that night with Rachel's help. Not a contract, a pledge. Each member would contribute a small monthly share to keep the lights on and the copier's stubborn drum replaced. In return, I would coordinate shared sales intelligence, organize in-person visits where they mattered, and negotiate joint distribution discounts where our combined volume gave us leverage. No ownership. No NDA that tried to muzzle gratitude. No glossy handcuffs. We called it Blue Harbor Consortium. Within a month, 13 members. Within 2, 19. By the 3rd month, I moved us into a larger space in a brick building near the canal with windows that looked like they used to witness humming looms. I hired 2 people. One was May Whitaker, who'd retired from operations at a university press because she said the meetings stuck to her like lint. She ran our back end like a kitchen with prep lists and clean knives. The other was a recent grad named Jonah who could build a simple, clean portal in a weekend and still understand why we kept a whiteboard with marker squeaks at the front of the room. We're not a rebellion, I told them the first Monday. We're a reminder. Through it all, I didn't reach out to anyone at North Star Quill. The company I'd given a third of my life to did not reach out to me. Until Jacob Harper did. Jacob had been my number 2, the kind of deputy you trust with your calendar and your child. He texted at 11:17 p.m. Can we meet? Not at the office. We chose a coffee stand near the trail by Fall Creek. People in running shoes trust each other without meeting. It's bad, he said without hello. His eyes had the wobble of someone who hadn't slept well in weeks. They made me director of field sales. Title only. All decisions, prices, allocations, outreach, come from digital strategy. They think sales calls are an outdated touchpoint. 3 people quit last week, he continued. 2 more are interviewing. Marisol at Copper Run says they don't recognize the company anymore. They moved Ironfield into a centralized bucket so they can manage the customer journey. The customer journey apparently includes losing your PO in a mail merge. He stopped, swallowed. There was a meeting about you. About me? Legal is nervous you'll weaponize your network. They had a slide about the personal capture risk of legacy executives. He smiled wearily. That was you. He slid a thick envelope over the table without looking at it. I didn't bring this. You didn't take it. It doesn't exist. I can't, I said. It wasn't that I didn't want to open it. It was that I wanted too much. Don't, he said, relief flickering across his face. It's bait. If you touch anything that looks like a list, they'll build a story around it. We sat watching a jogger's bright shoes blink along the path. You okay? I asked at last. I don't like the person I'm becoming in there, he said. I say leverage synergies without flinching now. If you need a desk, I said. Ours lean a little, but they hold. He exhaled. I'll call you after the next board meeting. He called 2 days later. They're bleeding, Mason. Revenue down 38% in 1 quarter. Return rates up. The digital team bragged about doubling email open rates, and a board member finally asked, does that sell any books? They blamed transition turbulence. I thanked him and hung up. Then I wrote on the whiteboard, don't answer the door to ghosts, even if they're yours. If you want to know what a company believes, listen to the adjectives it uses for nouns it used to love. North Star Quill began to call accounts units and books content. Buyers became stakeholders. Librarians became low-margin channels. I kept my head down and our coffee hot. We built a shared calendar of visits to accounts that still wanted a person to stand in the doorway and point to the title that would actually sell in a county where the winter festival triples foot traffic. We negotiated with a regional distributor to bundle shipments across 3 consortium members to cut freight. We created a private forum where members posted notes. The buyer at Heartland still wants ARCs in print. Mail 5, not 12. New indie in Traverse City. Owner is an ex-teacher. Loves author talks. Schedule April. The forum looked like the inside of my old notebook, except now 20 notebooks spoke to each other. We printed postcards on thick, unglossy stock because certain mail gets opened and certain mail gets thrown away. Jonah built a simple analytics dashboard that did the one thing we needed. Tell us if the things we did changed the numbers we cared about. They did. Slowly. The best changes never start with a spike. We didn't poach. We didn't posture. We just kept doing the work that had always worked. That's when the call came from a number I didn't recognize. Mr. Kerr, a woman said, principal voice, trained for boards. This is Maureen Kaler from the North Star Quill Board. We'd like to invite you to a conversation about returning to the company in a senior capacity. What capacity? Chief Revenue Officer. You'd oversee both traditional and digital sales. The board is committed to restoring balance. What about your current CEO? A pause, silk tearing. Leadership structures change. What about my replacement? I asked. Jacob, Mr. Harper is valued. The exact structure would be at your discretion. The temptation wore a friendly face. Restitution with a corner office. The fantasy every exiled person holds for a week or a month. Return not as the prodigal son, but as the architect. I appreciate the invitation, I said. I need to think. We're under time pressure, she said. Our next quarter. We're all under time pressure, I said, and hung up. I took a long walk past the old print building with its chimney bricked over like a scar. I stood on the footbridge and watched the water be water, the one member of the city that never attends a strategy meeting. When I got home, I wrote 2 lists, because lists are how doubt becomes visible. Go back, save some jobs. Mend something you loved. Feel like a hero for a week. Get swallowed by the thing that forgot what it is. Keep building. Protect what's working. No permission needed to do the right thing. Teach the next generation that you can do business without breaking it. Sit at a desk that leans and not care. I emailed Maureen in the morning. I told her no. That afternoon, I made 3 calls of my own. The first was to Anthony. I'm building something bigger than consulting, I said. Not a distributor, not an agency. A harbor where we all keep our names on the hull, but share a dock. I'm in, he said, without asking the price. Friends skip the math when the math is trust. The second call was to Marisol. She listened, interrupted twice to ask the kind of questions that showed she'd thought through 3 more steps than I had, and then said, you'll need a rule set. A living one. We'll help write it. The third was to Rachel. Make sure this structure doesn't trip any alarm, I said. She laughed. I'm building the window and the lock. We drafted a charter that fit on 3 pages. Members retained their independence and copyrights. We would never demand exclusivity. We would never represent ourselves as anyone but ourselves. We would negotiate collective benefits where it made sense and walk away where it didn't. Disputes would be resolved in a kitchen with coffee before lawyers were called. The last line read, we remember that books are carried from person to person, not from platform to platform. By winter, 23 members. By spring, 31. There is a moment at every trade show when truth slips under the door before anyone notices. At the Book Midwest Conference in Chicago, the consortium pooled for a booth, nothing fancy. We brought a rug that looked like a living room and a wooden table that didn't wobble and a sign that said Blue Harbor in letters you could paint by hand. We stacked arcs with paper belly bands and set out a bowl of hard candy because someone always needs a peppermint more than they need a pitch. On the second afternoon, I was showing a school librarian from Wisconsin a slim novel about a boy and a dog that made me miss my own dog when I felt a change in the air behind me. The way rooms inhale gossip. I turned. Celeste stood at the edge of our rug in a suit that could cut glass, flanked by 2 people whose shoes cost more than our rent. She looked around like an anthropologist discovering a long-lost tribe. Mason, she said, voice bright with the effort of being casual. This is charming. Welcome to our living room, I said. I've been meaning to reach out, she continued. We're exploring partnerships. Partnership is a generous word, I said. What do you need? A way to re-engage with certain accounts. She said accounts the way someone says an address in a city they've never visited. We believe a hybrid model offers the best path forward. We believe the model is people, I said. The hybrid is how you get to them. She shifted her weight, smile thinning. I'd like to schedule a meeting with your leadership. You're looking at it, I said. We don't have a C-suite. We have a cork board. A junior beside her spoke, reading from somewhere inside his skull. Blue Harbor functions as a collective. If North Star Cool joined as a strategic member. We don't have strategic members, I said gently. We have neighbors. Celeste's eyes cooled. Don't be naive. The market consolidates. That's how industries survive. Sometimes industries survive because a lot of small kitchens keep cooking, I said. We chose stoves over microwaves. She tilted her head toward the aisles. May I be blunt? You always are, I said. You can't scale affection. No, I said. We can only practice it until it becomes normal again. For a heartbeat, something like weariness crossed her face. Then she straightened. We'll be in touch. They left without tasting the peppermint. After they were gone, the school librarian looked at me over her glasses. I'll take 20 of the dog book, she said. And whatever else you recommend for fifth graders who like trouble. On the last day of the show, Maureen from the board found me near the loading dock. There are no angles for power plays among crates and forklifts. Everyone is simply trying not to get a toe crushed. You said no, she said without rancor. I did. You're doing what we should have done, she said. We forgot that our business is built on a kind of intimacy. It's embarrassing that the word embarrasses us now. You can still change, I said. We will. But we lost too much time. She hesitated. If we applied to join Blue Harbor as a member, we don't accept whales, I said, smiling. You'd breach and drown us. She laughed then, honest and surprised. Fair enough. She stuck out her hand. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I shook her hand. So am I. The first lawsuit letter arrived 2 weeks later. Cease and desist, broad as daylight. It accused Blue Harbor of tortious interference, which is a lawyer's way of saying you smiled at my friend across a crowded room. Rachel prepared our response like a dish you'd serve a fussy relative. Simple, clean, undeniable. We attached our charter, our pledge, our invoices. We highlighted the places where clients had approached us of their own volition. We included screenshots of public posts from North Star's own clients, complaining about missed shipments and vanished support. Then we waited. The board retracted the letter within a month, officially to refocus on internal operations, unofficially because discovery would have required them to open their closet and show the bones. I put the retraction in a folder labeled Ghosts, along with my old name badge, a photo from a holiday party where everybody looked 10 years younger, and the memory of the third chair. We were busy. May had us routing 4 smaller publishers' inventory through a shared warehouse on the south side, with a manager who knew how to wield a pallet jack and a calendar. Jonah deployed a minimal, readable, "Where's my book?" tracker that saved 3 customer service reps enough time to drink their coffee while it was still warm. We hosted monthly kitchen table calls where a dozen editors and sales folks swapped stories, not because stories scale, but because stories remind you why you started. We flew to Duluth in a snow squall because an indie there wanted someone to look at their calendar and tell them which author to fly in for their winter festival. We drove to Louisville because a school district was one signature away from cutting their library budget again, and the superintendent needed to hear a person explain what a book does to a brain that a screen can't do without permission. We mailed hand-addressed notes to 6 buyers in towns that never made it into investor decks. The notes did not convert into immediate revenue. That was never the point. I slept better, not because the world was fixed, but because the piece of it I could reach felt less broken. One afternoon, Sam walked into my office. Our desks were in a big room with windows that caught the western light like a held breath, and set down 2 coffees. You haven't asked, he said. About what? About whether I'm staying. I figured if you were leaving, you'd leave a note shaped like a statue, and I'd have to carry it forever. He laughed. I had interviews. A few big houses. They wanted me to manage pipelines. I asked them how many miles they expected me to put on a car, and they looked at me like I'd confessed a crime. You missed the road, I said. I missed the part where somebody remembers a buyer's dog's name, he said. I'll stay, if you'll let me keep the seat that wobbles. You can have 2, I said. We celebrated with bakery cookies, because some victories demand nothing more extravagant than sugar. If you want a dramatic turn, here it is, a headline in the State Business Journal 5 months after Blue Harbor's first meeting. North Star Quill CEO steps down amid performance woes. The article quoted a statement about misalignment between vision and execution. It listed declining revenue, an increase in returns, a one-time restructuring charge that everyone knows is a finger pointing in the wrong direction. It did not list the names of the buyers who had stopped taking their calls. The next week, the board appointed an interim CEO who had started as an assistant editor in the company's previous life. She sent a note to clients with a sentence that made my chest ache with its unadorned truth. "We forgot you were the reason we exist." People forgive almost anything when you tell the truth that way. Maureen called to ask, this time plainly, without velvet, if North Star could partner with Blue Harbor on regional outreach while they rebuilt their field team. "We'll bring it to our council," I said, meaning it. We were stubborn about not making decisions from one desk. The council said yes, with conditions written in plain English and printed on paper that felt like something you could keep. A week later, I found myself in North Star's building again, walking past the glass conference room where I had not sat in the third chair. The glass still gleamed. But on the table someone had set a cluster of hardcover catalogs bound with twine, and a pen cup that had been in the bottom drawer of my old office sat beside them with the teeth marks I'd put there during one very long year. The interim CEO met me in the hallway. "I don't expect you to save us," she said. "Just to remind us." "People don't need saving," I said. "They need someone to keep the door open while they carry the boxes." We shook hands and went to work. A year after my firing, Blue Harbor hosted a small summit in a renovated warehouse with tall windows and a draft that the heater never fully erased. We pushed 4 tables together so it looked like one long conversation. 40 publishers showed up, many with travel mugs and the faces of people who do not get enough sleep, but get enough meaning. We did not invite keynote speakers. The keynote was the person across from you telling you how they made it through a rough season without selling their name. At lunch, Evie, home from a semester that had turned her into a person I'd always hoped she'd be, stood beside the pastry table. "Dad," she said, eyes bright, "this is yours." "It's ours," I said, which was true, and also something I'd learned to say before I felt it. She hugged me like we were on a porch somewhere I can almost remember. "You look lighter," she said. "You did the right kind of revenge." "What kind is that?" "The kind where you build a life that makes the wrong kind obvious." In the afternoon, Anthony presented a case study that was really just a story about a book that should have died and didn't because a librarian pressed it into the right pair of hands. Marisol led a session on catalog curation that ended with people swapping Post-it notes like recipes. Sam taught a group of new reps how to read a room without a deck. Look for the person holding the pen. That's who decides. May chaired a logistics roundtable and politely humiliated 3 shipping reps into fixing a problem they'd been calling seasonality. During the final hour, I stood at the back with a cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm while I listened. The windows glowed with the sort of winter light that makes old wood look young. "We should get better chairs," Jonah said beside me. "Some of these are wobbly." "We need at least one that wobbles," I said. "So we remember." He nodded. "A reminder is cheaper than a consultant." "Cheaper and kinder," I said. On my way out that evening, I stopped by the corkboard where people had pinned index cards with needs and offers. Need: intro to school buyer in Fort Wayne. Offer: spare booth pass for spring festival. Need: anyone have a used pallet jack? Offer: my grandma's biscotti recipe. It feeds a crew. It looked like the inside of a healthy body, systems talking to one another. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. "Thank you." See. It took a moment before I realized what letter it was. I wrote back, "You're welcome." The right kind of pride doesn't require a flourish. In this business, you don't topple anything. You tend it. You make sure the spines are straight and the invoice is honest and the people seen. There's no triumphant montage. Just days that add up to a year and a room full of names that would not be there if someone hadn't called them. Occasionally, I drive past the building where the third chair still angles toward the wall. In the evening, you can see through the glass to the room where meetings happen. Sometimes there's a cluster of field reps around the table now, jackets on the backs of their chairs, heads bent together over a paper catalog that rustles when you turn the page. When that happens, I park for a minute and listen to the radiator in my car tick as it cools, and I think about a founder handing me a map and a coffee and saying, "We don't need charisma. We need stubborn." I still am. On the door to our office, below a hand-painted sign that says Blue Harbor, we taped a piece of paper at eye level. Jonah printed it in a font you can read from the hallway. It says, "People carry stories. We just carry the boxes." On most mornings, I'm the first one in. I make the coffee strong enough to lift an engine and open a window that sticks in humid weather. I sort mail into stacks with names written in the margins. I stand in the doorway for a long second and look at the room as if I were seeing it for the first time again. A room that leans a little and holds. And then I do what I've always done. I pick a name from the list and go where they are.